I used to wake up before anyone else and make coffee in the quiet. It was my favorite part of the day. The house felt honest then, no noise, no expectations. Just the hum of the machine and the window slowly turning light. Now I wake up later. I don't rush. The quiet doesn't feel like peace anymore. It feels like something missing its owner. There are still signs that I was here. Shoes by the door. A jacket that doesn't get worn. A name I still answer to, even though it no longer fits the way it used to. People assume nothing has changed. I let them. It's easier than explaining how quickly a life can split into before and after without ever making a sound. I still remember the weight of responsibility I carried without thinking about it. It wasn't heavy then. It felt earned. Natural. Like something I'd grown into. There was comfort in knowing where I stood and who depended on me. I never questioned that role. I never imagined it could be taken without my consent, without a conversation, without warning. What changed didn't arrive with an argument or a confession. There was no slammed door. No raised voices. Just a moment that didn't sit right. Something ordinary that should have passed without notice, but didn't. I can't even say why I paused. I only know that I did. It felt like standing in a room I'd been in 1,000 times and suddenly noticing a draft. Not strong enough to be alarming. Just enough to make you wonder where it's coming from. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was overthinking. I had years of trust backing me up. Years of believing I knew the shape of my own life. That's the thing about safety. You stop checking the locks. You stop asking questions that don't need answers. You stop imagining that the ground beneath you could shift while you're standing still. But once you notice that something is off, you can't unnotice it. The thought doesn't leave. It sits there quietly, growing heavier the more you try to ignore it. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't even name the feeling. I just started paying attention in ways I never had before. Looking back now, I can see that moment for what it was, the instant I crossed a line I didn't know existed. Before that, I belonged fully to the life I thought I was living. After it, I was already stepping away, even though I hadn't moved. I wish I could say I handled it well. That I stayed calm. That I trusted until I had reason not to. But the truth is, once doubt enters, it doesn't ask permission to stay. It rewrites memories. It questions things that used to feel solid. It turns love into something fragile. By the time I understood what I was looking at, something essential had already been taken from me. Not just trust. Not just certainty. But the version of myself who believed some roles were permanent. If you're still listening, consider subscribing to the channel. Stories like this don't offer easy answers, but if you've ever felt the ground shift beneath you without warning, you might recognize what comes next. When I think back to the beginning, it's almost hard to connect that version of my life to the one I'm living now. We weren't some dramatic couple. There was nothing flashy about us. We met through ordinary circumstances, the kind of thing people don't tell stories about. A friend introduced us, we talked, we kept talking. It felt easy. That was what I liked most. She had this calmness to her back then. Not quiet exactly, just steady. The kind of person who didn't seem like they needed to prove anything. I remember thinking that was rare. I'd dated people who made everything feel like a test. With her, it felt like I could breathe. We built things slowly. Weekends turned into routines. Inside jokes formed without effort. I started leaving things at her place without even thinking about it, an extra shirt, a toothbrush, little signs that my life was beginning to overlap with hers. There was comfort in that overlap. It felt like choosing something stable. I don't want to pretend I was perfect. I had my own baggage. I was cautious in ways I didn't always admit. I wanted loyalty, but I also wanted certainty. I wanted to believe that if you gave someone your full effort, you earned something lasting in return. And she seemed to want the same thing. When we talked about the future, it wasn't some grand fantasy. It was practical. Where we'd live. What kind of life we wanted. The idea of family came up in that gradual way, like something you don't force but also don't avoid. I remember the first time it really hit me that we were becoming something permanent. It wasn't a proposal or a big moment. It was a random evening when she was sick, and I stayed over just to make sure she ate something. She fell asleep on the couch, and I sat there thinking, this is what partnership is. Just showing up. Over time, showing up became the foundation. We got married without much spectacle. A small gathering, people smiling, photos that still exist in frames somewhere. I look at them now and I can still recognize the happiness. It wasn't fake. That's what makes everything harder. It wasn't like I was ignoring obvious warning signs from day one. We had normal struggles. Money stress here and there. Miscommunications. The occasional distance that comes with work and exhaustion. But nothing that felt dangerous. Nothing that made me think the whole thing was fragile. Then we became parents. That changed the atmosphere of everything. Suddenly the days weren't about us anymore. They were about schedules, feedings, sleep deprivation, little milestones that felt enormous. I threw myself into it. I wanted to be present. I wanted to be the kind of father who didn't disappear into excuses. Late nights, early mornings, all of it. I remember pacing the floor with a crying baby in my arms, whispering nonsense just to soothe them, feeling this strange mix of exhaustion and pride. It anchored me. My identity became wrapped up in being needed. Being reliable. Being the one who was there. And I believed, without even questioning it, that the life we were building was mutual. That the trust between us was solid because it had been tested by ordinary hardship, not shattered by anything dramatic. I didn't think of betrayal as something that happened in homes like ours. I thought if something was wrong, I would know. I thought if something was broken, it would break loudly. I didn't understand yet that some fractures happen quietly, while everyone is still pretending the foundation is intact. As time went on, trust stopped being something I actively thought about. It just existed, woven into the rhythm of our days. I didn't check in with it or test it. It was there the way gravity is there, you don't notice it until something starts to fall. Our lives became tightly structured around responsibility. Work schedules. Childcare. Bills. Appointments. The unglamorous details that fill most days. We moved through it like a team, or at least I believed we did. If there was tension, it felt manageable. Temporary. The kind of thing you work through because there's no alternative. I started measuring my value by how dependable I was. If I stayed late at work, it was for security. If I missed out on things I enjoyed, it was because someone else needed me more. I told myself this was what commitment looked like. You don't keep score. You don't ask whether it's even. You just do what's necessary. And I didn't mind. That's the part that still surprises me. There was pride in being the one who could handle things. The one who didn't crack under pressure. When she was overwhelmed, I stepped in. When something needed fixing, I fixed it. When decisions had to be made, I made them or supported hers without argument. It felt good to be trusted like that. Slowly, though, that trust turned into something heavier. I didn't realize how much of my identity was being shaped by it until later. At the time, it felt natural to place my own needs somewhere lower on the list. There was always a reason to postpone them. Tomorrow. Next month. When things settle down. They never really did. I became emotionally invested in the idea that I was essential. Not in an arrogant way, just in a quiet, internal sense. The routines reinforced it. Mornings, evenings, small rituals that only worked because I was there to keep them moving. I told myself that this was stability, that this was what a real family looked like. And maybe it was. But there's a difference between being needed and being irreplaceable. I didn't see that distinction at the time. I assumed one implied the other. Our conversations shifted without me noticing exactly when. Less about how we felt, more about logistics. Who was picking up groceries? Who was handling drop-offs? We still talked, still laughed sometimes, but there was a layer missing. I chalked it up to fatigue. Everyone says this phase is hard. Everyone says you lose pieces of yourself for a while. I believe that. When doubts flickered, brief moments where something felt off, I pushed them away. I didn't want to be the kind of person who questioned without cause. I trusted her. More than that, I trusted the life we had built. It felt disrespectful to doubt it. So I didn't ask questions. I didn't look too closely at what I didn't understand. I filled in gaps with assumptions that made everything feel safer. Looking back, I can see how dependent I had become, not just on her, but on the idea that this version of my life was secure. That my role was fixed. That I had earned permanence through consistency. That belief made me blind in small ways. I didn't notice how often I was the one adjusting, accommodating, absorbing tension so things wouldn't tip over. I didn't notice how easily I dismissed my own discomfort as stress or overthinking. I didn't notice that trust, when it's unexamined, can turn into something passive. At the time, it felt like loyalty. Now I understand it was also vulnerability. Because when your sense of self is built entirely around being reliable, around being the constant, you don't see how exposed you are until the thing you're depending on shifts. And when it does, you don't just lose trust. You lose the version of yourself that believed nothing could replace you. It didn't start with anything obvious. That's what I keep coming back to. If there had been a clear moment where everything changed, maybe I could have reacted differently. Maybe I could have named it. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter. Slower. The kind of thing you only understand once you're already too far into it. At first, it was just distance. Not dramatic coldness, not cruelty. Just small absences in the way she moved through the house. Conversations that didn't quite land. Her attention drifting when I spoke, like her mind was somewhere else and she was only half present. I told myself it was stress. Parenthood does that. Life does that. People get tired. So did I. There were evenings when she'd sit with her phone angled slightly away, thumb moving quickly, and when I'd ask what she was looking at, she'd answer too fast. Just stuff. Stuff. Always stuff. I didn't press. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to be controlling. I wanted to be the kind of partner who trusted without interrogating. Sometimes she'd smile at something on the screen, just a flicker, and then her face would reset when she noticed me watching. It wasn't proof of anything. It was nothing. It was probably nothing. But it lodged somewhere in me anyway. There were also changes in routine that didn't have explanations attached. A sudden interest in working later. Running errands alone. Taking longer than expected for simple tasks. None of it was impossible. None of it was outrageous. It was all plausible. That's what made it hard. Plausible things don't trigger alarms. They just create questions you feel guilty for having. I remember one morning, she was getting ready in a way that felt deliberate. Not just dressing, but checking herself in the mirror twice, adjusting details that normally wouldn't matter. I said something casual, like, "You look nice," and she gave me a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks," she said, already turning away. I stood there holding my coffee, feeling foolish for noticing. The hardest part was how normal everything still looked from the outside. We still went to family gatherings. Still made plans. still functioned. If someone had asked me then if something was wrong, I would have said no. Or I would have said, just busy. But busy doesn't explain the way silence can thicken between two people. There were moments when I felt like I was speaking into a room that wasn't fully occupied. Like she was listening, but not absorbing. Like her body was there and her mind was elsewhere. And then there was me. I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. Not spying. Not searching. Just noticing. The way you notice the sound of a car when you're waiting for someone to come home. The way you notice a pause before an answer. I hated that version of myself. I didn't want to be someone who measured tone or timing. I didn't want to feel my stomach tighten over something as small as a phone lighting up at night. Sometimes she'd pick it up quickly, step into another room, and come back with the same expression she always had. Calm. Neutral. I would sit there thinking, what am I doing? I tried to talk about it once, gently. You seem a little far away lately. She looked at me like she didn't understand the question. I'm fine, she said. Just tired. And I accepted that, because what else was I supposed to do? Argue with tired? The red flags weren't red. They were pale. Almost invisible. They only looked like warnings because of how badly I wanted reassurance. And I kept telling myself that trust meant not digging. That love meant giving the benefit of the doubt. That if something was truly wrong, it would announce itself. But unease doesn't announce itself. It waits. It sits quietly in the background, growing heavier each time you tell yourself you're imagining it, until one day, something small shifts, and you realize you've been holding your breath for longer than you knew. I didn't go looking for the truth. That part matters to me, even now. I wasn't suspicious enough to investigate. I wasn't preparing myself for anything. What happened came from the side, through something that was never meant to carry weight. It started as a distraction. Something casual. A conversation that didn't involve us at all. People joking, comparing results, laughing about things that didn't matter. I remember thinking it was harmless, almost boring. I didn't expect it to touch my life in any meaningful way. When the information came back, I skimmed through my own details without much interest. It all looked generic. Vague. Forgettable. Then my eyes drifted to something else. At first, I assumed I was reading it wrong. The numbers didn't line up the way I expected them to. I scrolled back up. Checked again. I even laughed quietly to myself, the way you do when something looks obviously incorrect. That's when I refreshed the page. Nothing changed. I tried to explain it away immediately. Data error. Mix-up. Wrong sample. There were so many reasonable possibilities that didn't involve the thought forming in the back of my mind. I clung to those. I wanted one of them to be true. I reached out for clarification, still calm, still convinced this would resolve itself. The response I got was polite, detached, and final. Everything was accurate. There was no indication of a mistake. I sat there longer than I needed to. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear the low hum of appliances, the distant sounds of life continuing exactly as it always had. Nothing outside of me had shifted. And yet, I felt something tear loose internally, slow and deliberate. I didn't confront her right away. That surprised me. I thought I would. I thought I'd demand answers, clarity, something solid to hold on to. Instead, I moved through the rest of the day like I was underwater. I watched. I listened. I noticed things I hadn't been paying attention to before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying memories I'd never questioned. Moments I had filed away as proof of permanence. Late nights. Firsts. The way I'd built my sense of purpose around showing up, every single time. I kept looking over, expecting to feel anchored by her presence. Instead, it felt unfamiliar. Like the space between us had widened without either of us moving. When I finally spoke, it wasn't planned. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I just said her name, quietly, and then said there was something I didn't understand. She knew immediately. That's what broke me more than anything else. She didn't ask what I was talking about. She didn't try to clarify. Her face changed in a way I'd never seen before, not anger, not defensiveness. Fear. A kind of resignation that told me this wasn't new information for her. It was just new for me. I never thought it would come out like this, she said. Not denial. Not confusion. Just that. I remember waiting for the room to spin, or for my chest to tighten, or for some dramatic reaction to kick in. Instead, everything went very still. Like my body had decided to shut something down to protect itself. I asked questions, but they came out flat. Controlled. As if someone else was speaking through me. She cried. She said things about timing, about mistakes, about not wanting to hurt anyone. I barely heard them. Because there are discoveries that don't feel like explosions. They feel like erosion. Like something solid has been dissolving beneath your feet for years, and you only notice once it's gone. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was realizing that something I had built my entire identity around wasn't what I thought it was. That the role I had lived inside of, protected, sacrificed for, had been quietly redefined without my knowledge. That night ended without resolution. We didn't make decisions. We didn't settle anything. We just sat in the aftermath of a truth that couldn't be put back where it came from. And as I lay there afterward, listening to the same quiet sounds from earlier, I understood something with a clarity that scared me. Some truths don't ask what you're ready to lose. They just take it. And once they do, nothing familiar ever feels quite as stable again. The days that followed blurred together in a way that made time feel unreliable. We tried to function like nothing had cracked, but everything had. Conversations became careful and shallow, like we were both afraid of stepping on something sharp. Practical matters still had to be handled, meals, schedules, responsibilities, but they felt hollow, stripped of the meaning they used to carry. I kept waiting for anger to arrive. People talk about rage like it's inevitable, like it announces itself and takes over. Mine didn't. What I felt instead was a constant pressure behind my eyes, a dull ache that never went away. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives you direction. What I felt just kept me stuck. She avoided my gaze most of the time. When she did look at me, there was guilt there, heavy and visible, but also something else. Relief, maybe. The relief of not having to hide anymore. That realization stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. We talked in fragments. I didn't plan for this, she said once. I know, I replied, even though I wasn't sure I did. Another time, she said, I didn't want to lose you. That one stayed with me. Not because it was comforting, but because I couldn't tell what she meant by it. Lose me how? As a partner? As a presence? As a role that made everything else easier? I started sleeping on the edge of the bed, then eventually somewhere else entirely. Not because we agreed to it, but because proximity felt unbearable. Every shared space carried weight now. The couch. The kitchen. The hallway where we used to pass each other without thinking. Silence filled the gaps where certainty used to live. I found myself grieving things that hadn't technically disappeared yet. Habits. Expectations. The ease of assuming tomorrow would look like yesterday. Even when we were in the same room, it felt like we were already living separate lives. There were practical consequences too. Conversations about what came next that neither of us wanted to have. Legal words. Options. Possibilities that sounded unreal when spoken out loud. Each one felt like another confirmation that there was no way back to what we'd been. I struggled with decisions more than I expected. Not because I didn't know what was wrong, but because everything I chose felt like it came with loss attached. Staying meant living with something I couldn't unknow. Leaving meant dismantling a life I had poured myself into. Neither option felt like a victory. What hurt most was how quickly the structure I relied on collapsed once trust was gone. I'd believed stability was something you built brick by brick, something that couldn't just vanish overnight. I was wrong. Once the foundation cracked, everything above it started to feel provisional. People noticed the shift before I was ready to explain it. They asked if we were okay. I gave vague answers. Just going through some things. The truth felt too complicated to share, too heavy to hand to someone casually. Inside, I felt unmoored. I questioned myself constantly. How much had I missed? How long had I been living inside an assumption instead of reality? Was I naive, or was I just trusting the wrong person? She apologized more than once. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes through tears. I believed she was sorry, for the pain, at least. But remorse didn't restore anything. It didn't return the version of me who felt secure in his place. Every interaction carried tension now. Even neutral exchanges felt loaded. Like we were both aware that we were standing in the wreckage of something neither of us fully understood yet. There was no clean break. No clear resolution. Just the slow realization that whatever we were becoming, it no longer resembled the life I had believed in so completely. And as each day passed, it became harder to tell whether I was mourning the relationship itself, or the certainty I'd lost about who I was inside it. The confirmation didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, stretched over time, like the truth needed space to settle before it could be fully felt. At first, I questioned everything, including myself. I replayed conversations, searched my memory for moments I might have misunderstood. I wondered if I'd reacted too strongly, if exhaustion or pride had shaped my interpretation of what happened. There were days when doubt crept back in, whispering that maybe things weren't as final as they felt. But slowly, the uncertainty thinned. Details I hadn't asked for surfaced on their own. Timelines became clearer. Silences started to make sense. Things she said early on, things I'd brushed past because I didn't want to push, lined up in ways that left little room for interpretation. None of it was dramatic. There was no single piece of information that felt like a closing argument. It was cumulative. And that accumulation did something strange. It didn't bring relief. It didn't bring satisfaction. It just removed the last excuse I had to doubt my own understanding of the situation. That was the reckoning. I realized I hadn't imagined the distance. I hadn't overreacted to nothing. The unease I'd lived with for so long had been my mind trying to protect me before I was ready to listen. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Because it meant I had ignored myself. I began to see how much I'd absorbed quietly to keep everything functioning. How often I'd minimized my discomfort to preserve stability. I wasn't angry at her all the time. Sometimes I was angry at myself, for believing that endurance was the same thing as strength. The hardest part was understanding that clarity doesn't fix what's broken. Knowing the truth doesn't restore trust. It just removes the illusion that there's something left to salvage. There were moments when I thought validation would feel like closure. It didn't. It felt like standing in an empty room after the noise has stopped, realizing you're alone with what's left. I started thinking differently about responsibility. About what people owe each other when lives are intertwined. About whether intent matters as much as outcome. None of those questions had clean answers anymore. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this are complicated, and sometimes the most important part is hearing how others interpret them. I'm still living inside the consequences of what happened. Still learning how to carry knowledge that can't be set down. The validation came, but it didn't tell me what to do with it. It just confirmed that the life I thought I was protecting had already been gone long before I realized I was standing in its place. I don't know what the right ending is supposed to look like. People want clean conclusions. They want a lesson wrapped in certainty, a clear answer about who was wrong and what should happen next. But real life doesn't land that way. It just keeps moving, even when you feel like you've stopped. I still think about the roles we assign each other. Husband. Wife. Father. Family. Words that feel permanent until they aren't. Until something happens that forces you to ask what those titles actually mean, and whether they survive the truth. There are days when I look back and feel nothing but grief. Other days, I feel numb. And sometimes, I feel something I don't know how to name, an understanding that love and betrayal can exist in the same story, and that morality isn't always simple when people are tangled together. What stays with me most is this: some discoveries don't just change what you know. They change who you are allowed to be afterward. So I'll leave you with the question I still can't answer for myself. If trust is broken in a way that can't be undone, what do you owe to the life you believed in? And what do you owe to yourself once the truth is no longer optional? If you want more stories that live in these uncomfortable, human spaces, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. It helps the channel grow, and it means you'll be here for the next one.